Maybe that's where it stops, or maybe this is just going to be constant encroachment. And I loved one comment somebody said on Twitter where they said, like, I don't know, anytime I see cloud computing, the Kill Bill siren goes off in my head. And I'd forgotten all about that movie, but I remembered it. It's like the like, I thought that was such a good comment. That's what bothered me about this I want to say even from like late 90s, early 2000s, I realized this was a potential problem. It's just that I sort of put it in the back of my mind because it was like, well, it was with MMOs and those cost money each month. I'm never going to be able to afford to play those anyway. So, but then it just spread, you know? So now and I always saw it as like a real threat. So there's no good reason for it. That's the takeaway from it.
It pisses me off to no end when a company simply sits on intellectual property and lets games they don't even care about die because of how completely asinine our copyright law is. If you make a game but haven't sold it or supported it for 10 years or more and haven't been in a coma, why the hell should people be stopped from playing it or having it distributed? Don't answer that. There are no good reasons, only legal ones. I'm against games dying, and I think it should be fought by any means possible. I have no respect for laws that kill games, and you shouldn't either. I've been playing these games on a standalone Flash player because it gives me more options, has less overhead than a web browser, and I resent any game that makes me connect to a central server in order to play it. This will not be the last time I talk about this. But the short version is, while having to be online is just a nuisance, what I hate is that any game that makes you connect to a central server is on life support. The day the company decides to pull the plug, unless somebody hacks it, that game is gone forever. That's because almost no companies ever give players a way to play the game after they kill the server. Now, I have to say, the scariest thing about these games to me is that I believe they all require a central server in order to run. So if the host company ever stops that, these games die for good. Now, these are all by smaller or medium-sized companies, however, so maybe there's a chance they would patch them to still be played if the server did get shut down. I would really love to see all companies commit to end-of-life plans for online-only games. I love scenic open-world driving games, and that's exactly what The Crew is. You get to drive across a miniaturized version of the entire continental US. I read it takes 2 hours real time to go from one end to the other. Outstanding. Now, with that said, this game is an abomination because it requires a connection to an online server, and Ubisoft will shut it down eventually. I'm not speculating. Ubisoft has already done this with the game Shadowbane. So this game is still a new launch, and it's already on death row. What a piece of shit. This game is dead. Now, I don't mean all the servers are empty and you can't find someone to play with. You have to have servers for them to be empty. I mean, if you haven't already, you're never going to play this game. In 2013, 4 years after the game was released, Electronic Arts decided enough was enough and pulled the plug on Battleforge, and it has been stone cold dead ever since. Guys, I think this is the biggest issue in gaming today. A lot of gaming controversies, I think, don't matter that much. Meanwhile, companies like EA are murdering games quietly like a fucking serial killer. I mean, if you're a gamer, that's the biggest sin a company can commit. Crappy DLC, microtransactions, buggy releases. That stuff doesn't seem so important next to just killing the whole game, huh? I see all these games that are going to die forever, and it's entirely preventable. This is insanely preventable. Like, imagine a new custom started creeping into our culture where about every 10 years, you cut off one of your fingers. Then people would take the chopped fingers and feed them to the birds. And over time, this starts becoming very common, socially accepted. It becomes so normal, most people just don't even think about it anymore. And journalists might write articles about how we need to chop off the fingers or the birds will die. Or maybe people will debate if we should just do it every 15 years. But even that kind of discussion is rare. But you might be part of a minority thinking, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this? Maybe we could just not chop off our fingers and buy some bird seed instead? Or hey, maybe just not even worry about the birds. Let them fend for themselves and still not chop off our fucking fingers? And you say this to people, but the culture is so different that they just think you're some old kook who still cares about all his fingers, weirdo. Now, it's best if a company plans for this situation from the beginning, but even if they don't, they have options. Sell the property. Now, this one rarely happens, but it's not unheard of. But really, that just passes the buck to the next company, so this doesn't really count. Patch the game. Now, this one is more work, and I understand may not be realistic for a lot of situations. But if it is, that's a way to keep selling the game and make smaller profits without the ongoing cost of a server. Release the source code. Hey, the fan base will have an emulator up in no time if you do this. The company doesn't have to support anything. There's basically no cost to them. 99% of game companies that have had to shut down a central server go with the final option. Go fuck yourself. Need for Speed World has reached the ripe old age of 5 years before dying, so it managed to beat out Battleforge. You know how some games don't have an ending? You have to decide for yourself when you're done? Well, now you know when you're done, whether you are or not. Thankfully, its death won't be a complete tragedy since we can still play the old games with the same maps, but man, it still feels senseless. Awards time! First award. It's dead. You're not playing these games. Second award. They killed it. This was not a natural death. EA pulled the fucking trigger. And the final award? They will kill again. There's going to be a generation of games no one can ever play again. So what can we do about this? I hate to be a downer, but I don't know if we can do anything. The only two solutions I can see are to pass laws to make this practice illegal, or create a climate among gamers and the press that's so openly hostile to it that it would be a liability for the companies involved. I doubt either one will happen, so this episode is mostly just a lament of dead games. This is my message to the industry asking them to stop killing games. I want to see this game live on after it shuts down, because this game is going to die. But before that does happen, I have another wish. Anybody who has a legal background out there, I want you to start sharpening your knives. You know why? Because of this stupid advertisement Funcom put up all over the place. Pay once, play forever. Forever. They're honestly saying that about this game that requires a central server? Terms of service say they can do whatever they want and don't have to keep it running for any reason. Why is this okay? That would be like me saying, I will give everyone who watches this video free candy. You watch this video, I will mail you candy. Then in the end credits, I say I have no obligation to give you candy for any reason. So I lied, but it's okay because I said I was lying later?
Ross Broadcast, physical or digital? Trick question, DRM or not? That's what matters, because you can get a physical disc of a game. If you need to connect on Steam or some other service, it doesn't matter. It's no kind of backup at all. I think I've helped to establish that point a little bit with the Battleforge episode.
So there was a piece of news that you really want to talk about, Ross, which is an article that claimed that EA is hoping to regain the trust of PC gamers. And you had a lot of interest in this particular article, I believe.
Yeah, well, I thought this would be a good topic because I feel like maybe everyone here, they might have a different answer of what they can do. Yeah, it was like what they want to know what they can do to regain the trust of PC gamers. And I feel like people can have different answers because I have really specific answers of what.
Go for it.
Okay, well,
Sure.
The number one thing I hate that EA does is they kill games.
Yes,
And
they do.
I mean, just, you talked about this in your multiplayer only video. I mean, kill beyond completely unplayable. Not
Yes,
because there's not other
dead.
people, but because It relies on a central server, and then they shut it down, and then you can never play it again. Meanwhile, you can play multiplayer DOS games from like 20 years ago and without a problem.
Artificial obsolescence, you know, they're putting an artificial timer
that's exactly
on the
what
game.
it is.
And really, let's be honest, the only reason they want to do it is so that you'll buy the fucking new one, and so they don't have to pay to keep the servers up for the old one.
Sometimes, like in your video, I've mentioned it too, in Battleforge, they had no RTS lineup.
No,
there was no game to herd people to.
Yeah.
It's just dead. It's just a horrible, horrible business model.
2 months ago, EA announced that they're shutting down this game starting March 1st. Now, if you've seen the Battleforge episode, this is practically a sequel to that. And guess what? My mind hasn't changed about killing games since I made that. I think killing games is the worst thing a game company can do. And once again, there's no good reason this should be happening. This is a single-player game that EA forced to put on their online servers, and now they're killing it. Oh, and they killed Maxis, the developer, too. When you kill a game, you're killing everything. The atmosphere in this game is great. Look at this planet here. Killing this game is an art crime. It's gonna keep going. It will be a gaming tragedy when the Secret World dies. And that's not going to be the last great online-only game. EA recently announced they plan on trying a rental system for their games, so you can pay per month to play the games without owning anything. Jesus Christ, how long until that's their policy for all their games, and they can just shut them down whenever they feel like it? Okay, here are the awards. You know, I don't want this episode to just be a repeat of Battleforge, because I hate making episodes like this. So I have a surprise ending for you. I thought about this a long time, and I want to take things in a new direction. In Battleforge, I said how this was mostly just a lament, because I felt powerless to change anything about the situation. That's still mostly true, but then I also realized we can be a complete pain in the ass. My plan is I want to bombard EA executives with message after message asking them to stop killing games. I want everyone who even remotely cares about this to send them a mailed, stamped letter asking them to stop killing games. Tell them you want them to stop making online-only games that they intend to shut down so that customers can never play them again. It's a destructive and disrespectful practice, and they will never regain the trust of gamers as long as they keep doing this.
Besides my video, Lazy Game Reviews also made one about it that said a lot of the same things I did. And I noticed in the comments of that, a lot of people were saying like, well, you know, under British consumer law or under German consumer law, you know, they can't do this or they have to provide a refund and this. I was thinking, well, shoot, you know, in the USA, I don't think there's any legal protection against what they're doing. But in Europe, there might. If that was a big enough deal so that you could press a lawsuit and get a refund for every single game EA has killed that you've purchased, or just even put money into. Like for, you know, Battleforge, you know, it's a free-to-play game, but if you spent some money and got a couple items, you know, you're a consumer. So that might create enough incentive that, yikes, okay, this is totally not worth it to have this practice. Let's just have some end-of-life plan.
I think they're always trying to push like how far can we push the developer?
It's an erosion of what you're getting as a consumer, really.
Yeah.
Because, well, I mean, for me, it hits on a deeper level because to me, it's just sort of a shock that like, oh, I can never play this at all if I want to. Or just, I mean, in some games, I may not be that interested in the gameplay, but like a lot of MMOs, I might be curious what the world looks like or if it had a good soundtrack or something. And no, that's all just being destroyed. I mean, I think it's probably not on the same value level necessarily, but to me, it elicits the same reaction, sort of like a book burning, or you know, it's because you're just destroying culture. That a lot of, I'm sure the devs aren't happy about it either, because you know they can't show that to anyone in the future. Yeah, I worked on this game. You can never play it. There's some blurry YouTube video of it, somebody, but they don't show the good parts though. It's a new precedent that pretty much no one wants except the, I guess, shareholders of the company.
Hi, welcome to Dead Game News, the news channel devoted to dead games. I started this because of a trend I hate in gaming, which is killing them. Nowadays, games are getting shut down all the time, and we're destroying gaming history and sometimes good games. In fact, this is happening so much now, I think there's room to make a news channel on it. So this will be all the news I can find about games that are either dying or have been resurrected, because every once in a while, some super fans use some coding necromancy to create gaming zombies. It sure as hell isn't the parent company saving them. If you're a gamer, you better hope I'm not covering any games you like. Hey, welcome to the first episode of Dead Game News. Our first news item is a month old, but it's a big one, and it's still dead. As of April 1st, the PlayStation 2 network has shut down. So every single game on the PlayStation 2 that required an online connection is now unplayable. How about that? Now, most of these games are still playable as either single player or local multiplayer, but this is a big list of games that are now completely dead for online multiplayer. And the last game to go, Final Fantasy XI, is now completely unplayable on the PlayStation 2. Now, Final Fantasy XI is still going on the PC, but hey, who knows how long that has either. Anyway, the next time you hear about cloud functionality or console games that require you to connect to Sony or Microsoft or whoever, well, remember the PlayStation 2, guys. Our last announcement is the free-to-play game Nosgoth is also shutting down at the end of the month on May 31st. You know, a lot of people seem to be cool with the game dying if it's multiplayer only. Why? This is a textbook example of a game that doesn't need to die. If it had been designed properly, you could run this game forever. This is an 8 to 10 player action arena game. Oh yeah, trying to run that with a private server on a personal computer? That's some real arcane magic right there. If only there were hundreds of examples of multiplayer games from the 90s and early 2000s that you could still run today because they allowed private servers. Thank God we're running everything through the company server so they can shut it down and no one can ever play it again. Welcome back to more Dead Game News. This is the third episode this month since starting this. So it's not just my imagination. We're killing off games faster than ever. Scrolls is literally the second game they've produced. It's almost a year and a half old and it's being killed. So the message you should take from this is no game that relies on a company server is safe, guys. $2.5 billion couldn't protect this game from being shut down after a year and a half.
This is sort of a personal request of mine because I am interested in this game. And I have received no money whatsoever to say this, even though I probably would take it if they wanted me to, but The Crew, the fact that it hasn't done so well financially and they're releasing it for free that anybody can just walk in and just get a copy right now, says to me this game's days are numbered. It's one of these games where you have to be online in order to play it. And I predict this game, I'd say this game has 4 years or less before it's dead. If you have experience or learning about consumer law in Europe, New Zealand, Australia, basically any country that has reasonably strong consumer laws, unfortunately not the USA for what I'm doing, go ahead and email me, rossdubiescott@gmail.com. This is part of the long chain where I'm basically trying to end the practice of killing games. People that basically, if you've paid money for a game, then the company just decides, nah, we're gonna shut that down so you can never play it. I think that might be illegal in some countries. What I have planned, I have this whole sort of gradual campaign I'm planning for trying to stop getting games killed. This is one of the reasons I care a lot about, killing games, because this game's 13 years old and it still runs pretty nicely. It's fun. I'd say the gameplay hasn't quite been matched since.
You do talk a lot about in your videos about corporations killing off video games or the lifespan of a video game and how online only, is just a ticking time bomb. What got you really started into realizing this or looking into this kind of thing?
This is the sort of thing I kind of wish I wasn't involved with, but it just bugged me too much. I wish it wasn't a problem, and it didn't used to be a problem. Oh yeah, speaking of killing things like games, got an update. Apparently in Australia, looking very promising for the long term, preserving games, because apparently unless you're paying a monthly fee, which some games are like that, but most of these games that are getting killed, you're not. Games are considered a good and not a service there. If I think 2017 was particularly bad for games shut down, I think as a whole, it's going to be accelerating.
Now the good news is that I am not giving up the fight for stopping games from being killed. On the contrary, I'm trying to take it to the next level. And part of that is going to involve a much more thorough documentation of games that are being killed. So if I miss any on Dead Game News, it's gonna come back around. About 1 million people linked me to this video of an old man who was playing this game as his main entertainment. See, this is how game shutdowns work. They almost all affect a minority of people, but then that minority really cares about them. Then a different game will affect a different minority, and it adds up. This guy could still be playing if they patch the client or released relevant source code for a server emulator, but yeah, hell will freeze over before that happens. Now this guy has to play bingo or something instead. Asheron's Call looks way better than bingo. And frankly, I think the practice of a company taking your money for a game, then intentionally making that game unplayable forever, should be illegal. Maybe not retroactively illegal, since it can be really hard to fix things after the fact, but something should be done to try to wind this practice down. But that's not what's happening. If anything, it's accelerating in the opposite direction. So there's still a need for people to recognize what's happening so we can try to affect the future. In December, the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment asked the U.S. Copyright Office to make an exemption to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act to allow preservation of games that require an online server. When I heard about this and saw some initial reactions to it, I'm not sure the English language has a word for how I feel about this. Say you have a controversial topic with two different sides, and you understand the topic, but you also see that this is just one small element of a much larger system going on. Whereas this topic that's getting all the attention isn't even that important to this larger picture. Like, say this topic over here is way more important, but that one's getting so little attention, it doesn't even have sides to it yet. And to complicate matters, let's say there's a little bit of truth on both sides of the first topic, although one side has a lot more truth than the other. But again, in practical terms, this is insignificant compared to everything over here. Okay, first, let's rewind a bit. This is not the first appeal to the US Copyright Office to have an exemption for games. Back in 2015, the Electronic Frontier Foundation requested the US Copyright Office make an exemption to legally allow people to run abandoned games that required an online component as part of the copy protection. Except when they did this, it specifically omitted online-only games. Because of timidity? I don't know. Well, that exemption was won, so now the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment is essentially asking for the exact same thing, but for online games. It's like a movie with a big loose end that the sequel has to take care of. Now, it's also worth remembering that during this time, the Entertainment Software Association came out and spoke against even allowing you to play games that had online DRM that had been shut down, saying it was hacking and a wolf in sheep's clothing and associated with piracy. Because if there's one thing we've got to do, it's stop people from pirating games that aren't being sold. The takeaway from this is the ESA is not your friend when it comes to being able to run your game that you paid for. So remember that we're basically having to fight the games industry itself in order to run your games, because we're in crazy land. ESA has again come out against preservation for games that require an online server also. What a surprise. They released a 41-page document listing all the reasons they're against this. I skimmed through this and all it did was raise my blood pressure. They say allowing people to play online games they've shut down is horrible because companies can resell their back catalogs, like Sega releasing their games on mobile and making a kick-ass commercial to go with it. Okay, except that's not what this is about at all, because people who bought the original Genesis games can still run them today, and they were never online only to begin with. So they're trying to obfuscate the issue by talking about something completely different and then use that as supporting evidence. Some of this document is denying the problem exists, basically saying companies have a financial incentive to keep the games alive, therefore there's no problem. Well then where do I find the official company solution and not some unlicensed emulator running Darkspore, Battleforge, Need for Speed World, The Sims Online, Warhammer Online, Shadowbane, Asheron's Call? Okay, you get the idea. Now, the sliver of truth to all this, like I mentioned earlier, is that they are concerned about people taking money based on running games they don't own as a commercial interest. And yeah, you know what? I side with the companies on that one. They invested the money into making the game, they should retain the rights, and no one should be selling unlicensed copies of it, even if they shut it down. Just because I think people are entitled to play games they bought, that doesn't mean I think they also get to own the intellectual property of it and sell it. Look at how this entire situation has been framed. Basically, gamers who want to play the games they have bought are the troublemakers here, trying to skirt the law, and the companies who have invested all this money are simply trying to defend their rights. And the debate is, what is the reasonable balance? This framing affects the entire conversation. It's important to have awareness of this, otherwise people's views can backslide without them even realizing it. There is a term for this concept called the Overton window. What it means is as long as one side is pushing more in one direction on a scale of what's reasonable, then over time what's reasonable today becomes radical tomorrow, and what happened in the past becomes unthinkable in the future. The shifts can often be invisible, which is why I'm pointing this one out. If I said in the 80s or 90s, you should not be stopped from playing a game you bought, the end, I think just about everyone would agree with me. But now the conversation is way past that. The museum is saying we should be allowed to attempt to play a game we bought. And the games industry is saying, no, you shouldn't. That is a massive shift from where we were. Even if the side pushing back wins, that's still less rights than where we were. The thing is, I actually consider my stance in a vacuum to be kind of moderate. I didn't change, the industry did. Some people go farther than I do and think the companies owe the players gameplay changes, or additional bug fixes, or lower prices, and so on. I personally think the companies should be allowed to do whatever they want with their games, except leave you with nothing after they've taken your money. That's the line I just can't cross. Next up, the online card game Scrolls got shut down not long ago. However, the developer Mojang announced they plan to release the server software and a patch client to be able to run it. So this is the very definition of an end-of-life plan, and it will no longer be a dead game after they do that. This is the absolute gold standard of what companies should be doing in order to sell online-only games responsibly. This is an online-only game that relies on a central server. Uh-oh. I'm not a fan of that. Okay, I know I've pulled this trick on you before, but at the time of this video, this game is not being shut down, and it's not happening next week or anything. Some games, you play through them, then you're done. Others are practically a lifestyle change. This is the latter, or it would be with mods. If this had the modability of something like the Elder Scrolls games, then this would honestly make it the dream game status for me. Oh! Online-only gameplay, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to remind everyone, this is an online-only game. Yes, this game is going to die. It relies on a central server, and neither Ubisoft nor Ivory Tower have made any statement regarding an end-of-life plan. So without divine intervention, in the future, you're never going to be able to play this game. You know, once upon a time, a company dropping support didn't mean the game stopped working. All it meant was they dropped support. You had to troubleshoot it yourself. Boy, I'd love to go back to that model. On the plus side, I'm slowly working on a legal campaign to make this business practice of taking people's money, then intentionally destroying their product illegal, because I think it already is in various countries and just isn't being enforced. But that's going to be a long process if it even works. So what the industry is telling us is they're throwing their hands up in the air and saying what? Let someone host a game with 10 players in a small multiplayer map? That's impossible! We just can't do it. It's just too hard.
If you were a developer saying that about some arena shooter in the 90s or early 2000s, you wouldn't get published. That's all there would be to it. And guess what? Almost every small multiplayer game from that time period still works. See, I'm worried the average gamer, and especially younger ones, have been brainwashed. I think the perception of a lot of gamers now is that single-player games should keep working, but it's reasonable for multiplayer games to stop working once the company shuts down the server. Because that's just the way games work. They're online, duh. Guys, I want you to understand that is totally and completely wrong. There is nothing technical to stop a small multiplayer game from working online forever, basically. The only reason this happens is because the developer or publisher sets it up this way. That's it. If a game has to connect to a company server, it's on life support essentially. As soon as the company turns it off, you can't play your game. But if it connects to a private server, the way most games of this type used to work, it can run as long as there are 2 or more people who want to play the game. Although this can be a little bit tricky since sometimes you have private servers, but they still have to authenticate through the company one, in which case you're back to life support again. But if it's this kind of private server, you can run them forever. Take a game like Descent. That's a 24-year-old game. The company that made it doesn't even exist anymore, and yet it still has working online multiplayer. It cannot be killed. Ubisoft is doubling down on their streaming-only future. Microsoft is going to make sure streaming-only games is a focus of the next Xbox, and Electronic Arts is on board for a streaming future as well. I've actually come to some peace on all this since I made the last episode. If you've ever seen the movie Stripes, there's a great scene where the protagonist decides he's sick of it all, parks his cab on a bridge so he blocks traffic, tosses his car keys into the river, and just relaxes with a zen-like calm, taking in the sights. This is exactly how I feel about a streaming-only future. See, right now, dead games are very frustrating for me because some of them defy the odds and get resurrected by fans making reverse-engineered server emulators. But you never know if this will happen. Like, hey, looks like City of Heroes is getting something. Only took them 6 years. Most online-only games die, but some of them live, so I'm always clinging on to that hope. It's like that Dumb and Dumber meme. There's a chance. But with streaming games, there is no chance. Game over. If games go streaming only, I've decided that's my cutoff point. I'm done. I'm never gonna buy them. I'm never gonna play them. At most, I might watch a playthrough on YouTube if it has a good plot or something. Gaming for me ends with streaming. A common response to the last episode I saw was that Lawbreakers deserve to die because it was a bad game. Guys, if you think that, you're missing the point. It doesn't matter if the game is good or bad. That's a completely separate issue. If we kill the bad games, we kill the good ones too. It's all the same business model. The bad ones are just the first in line. The point is people paid for that game. The company took away their ability to play it. The company also kept their money, and the entire thing was preventable. That's a standard that shouldn't be tolerated for much of anything. I don't see why games get a free pass on that when virtually everything else sold doesn't. My side is saying game companies should be free to make their game however they want, but if they sell you a game for money, they owe you a game. The end. Companies should not be allowed to intentionally destroy creative works for profit, because most of humanity sees the destruction of culture as a bad thing. There are some nuances to what I'm saying, but that's close enough. Okay, now let's compare that to what their side is saying. They don't owe you anything. It's their sense of self-entitlement that thinks they do. We're not an entitled child who believes they deserve something that doesn't belong to them. They don't owe you anything. Why do people keep saying they owe you anything? I don't understand this entitled logic. It's children and underdeveloped adults that are saying they owe anyone anything. Talk about being entitled. Nobody in this world owes you a thing. So yeah, I think the public is going to be a little more receptive to my side than theirs. Mine's more traditional. The concept of getting something in return for your money is actually very old. Well, if you're a gamer, you probably have an idea of what it is. So let's list some common traits and see if we can narrow it down to what actually defines it. Here's my list. Let's go down the line. Online only. Yes, I'd say that one defines every use of games as a service. Now, some games have downloadable content that you can run offline, but that's not what the industry means when they refer to this. In fact, another term for games as a service is live service games. In other words, you're connected online, so it's live. But hey, I'll give another freebie. If offline games as a service games exist, then those are not fraud. So hey, Oblivion Horse Armor, not fraud. This is actually a great baseline if you want to determine how fair or not you think I'm being towards game companies. This says something about where my standards are these days. But back to defining things, we'll say yes, every games as a service is online only. However, not every online game is games as a service. Games as a service means the company is providing you the service of allowing you to play your game. And yes, I am being facetious. You didn't used to need permission for that. Now, people will debate what games as a service should mean, but this is the real world hard definition. Games as a service means the business practice of players not having control of whether they can play a game due to a company withholding that function. That is all it is in its purest, most distilled form. Now, some of you may know that I'm a huge advocate against killing games. By killing games, I mean the practice of a company's actions leaving a game completely unplayable by anyone who bought it. This is also known as bricking a game. Well, killing games and games as a service are handcuffed together. You almost don't have one without the other. See, all games as a service depend on you connecting to a server controlled by a company. That's fine while the game is running, but eventually most companies decide they're not making enough money on the game anymore to justify the server running, so they shut it down. Once that happens, every single person who bought the game can never play it again. If I sold you a copy of a game on disc, the next month while you were sleeping I snuck into your house and broke the disc, I would go to jail. Customers buy games with the expectation that they will function. If 100% of all copies sold of a game cease to function because of deliberate interference from the seller after the point of sale, how can that be considered an honest practice? Now, the opposition would say this isn't fraud because you were sold a perpetual license. And just because the company breaks your game, it doesn't mean you lost your license. You are still free to repair the game after they break it. I say this is a disingenuous argument on multiple levels. If somebody sells you a bike and then later you get a flat tire, yes, your product no longer works and it takes some effort to repair it. But that's something the average person can be reasonably expected to do. More importantly, the company that sold you the bike didn't come to your house and puncture the tire. Games are unique experiences. You can't replace them any more than you can replace books in a library with different authors. You can't replace Dracula with Twilight and say nothing was lost because they're both about vampires. It doesn't work that way. I'm not going to spend much time explaining why saving art has value because for me, it's innate. If you don't understand why art or creative works have value, I probably can't reach you on that. Now, of course, we can't save all artistic works. That's just not practical. There's too many. Plus, some of them suck. But we can decide for ourselves what's worth saving and what's not. Games as a service denies that chance to everyone. When I see a game with obvious creative value being destroyed, this is what comes to mind. Now, the reality is both better and worse than that. The part that's better is that games that are destroyed are far less likely to contain ideas that are so powerful some see them as a threat. The part that's worse is that publishers are way more successful at destroying games than oppressors ever were at destroying books. In the early days of film, we lost a lot of stuff because the studios didn't know any better. That's what scares me. Now we do know better, and yet we're still going backwards. It's like watching a driver take a bus over a cliff, and he knows he's taking it over the cliff. It's a kind of madness. Games as a service, the way we do it now, permanently destroys games and all the work the creators put into them. It's entirely preventable and serves almost no purpose for anyone. It's just wrong. at some point a company should take responsibility for its actions? And that's how I feel about most of these counter arguments. They're excuses. They're excuses not to do what everybody in gaming should know is needed. This right here is not the end of the world. Somehow, companies found a way to make thousands of games in the past and not destroy them. It's necessary to go back to that. And it's cheap. See, companies are going to fight us all the way on this because, you know, customers are the enemy. But this is what they care about. This is their gravy train. And preserving games doesn't need to interfere with that. If I could get companies to understand one thing, it's that this is going to be way cheaper than any litigation. All I want here is the absolute bare minimum of responsibility to not kill games. Just the tiniest bit. My God. I said at the beginning that I'm declaring war on games as a service. That's true, but this is retaliatory. The games industry itself has declared a war on ownership against the consumer for years now, and they're winning. We're seeing the industry act with utter impunity on this. At the time of this video, a new era is starting. Stadia has been announced with streaming-only exclusive games, meaning you'll never be able to preserve those. It's impossible. Not even that 0.1% chance. And they're not alone. So many companies are tripping over themselves to do streaming games just like that. The games industry is so eager to take away the concept of consumer ownership. And that means these games are going to get destroyed. This is like something out of a science fiction story to me. And yet, here we are. I have talked to multiple attorneys and some have messaged me. It's weird because I would go and talk with some of the attorneys and then afterwards somebody else, another legal expert would message me saying, well, you know, they're right, but then this part isn't quite accurate. And then it's like, it goes back and forth. However, I'm seeing fairly consistent messages on some points. This is all for US law. For global law, I have zero conclusions to this point. So for US law, I'd say it's looking pretty bad. So again, I'm gonna need more help on, you know, Canada, France, Australia, and just the European Union in general, I think. Because I think those are gonna be kind of the biggest markets where this applies. But I'm guessing like the European Union would be, that would be a heavyweight. People came down on me on was that, or I mentioned that the minimum effort solution would be anywhere from under an hour to a few days based on consulting. I'm not talking about a working game from that. I'm talking about you have a chance now. Like a really technically minded person has a chance to restore that game where there's you know, less than 0.01% chance without that.
I'm not entirely convinced that it's that much work. Even so, because they have a running server. Like they have a running server piece of software. So if they release it, presumably, like we're long past the days of proprietary hardware in gaming. Is this running on a Linux box, a Windows box, or a Mac box? It's not like the company has created their own private software that only runs on this specific limited hardware set. You know, this runs on something that someone can buy.
Oh, well, you know what? We're shutting down this game, but our other MMO uses a lot of the same code. And if you get to see everything and how this game works with the source code, that could make a hacking nightmare for our other game. Okay, but see, that's why so that's the thing. We're doing nothing. We're doing absolutely nothing, or almost worse than nothing with the encryption. When I mentioned that minimum effort option, that would not expose them to either of those risks. It doesn't give out code. They can still do it without, you know, threatening middleware licenses, and it doesn't give enough information to make the game hackable. So that's why I was really trying to find any angle I could on this, you know, to just address any kind of concerns. And I think it's mostly just, you know, this takes some effort, and the people making the decisions on this are just looking at us from a 100% business oriented perspective, that it's like, well, we don't have to support it. That would, you know, I don't even want to deal with it. I can just end this now and we're fine. That's the industry standard at the moment.
I'm kind of curious what you've been seeing as sort of the solution or if there is
Well,
one.
honestly, right now, under U.S. law, I'm not seeing a lot of promise. In fact, I'm almost ready to write it off under U.S. law. Actually, one person who works in the industry told me that for smaller scale games, like let's say, well, I mentioned Lawbreakers, Nosgoth, but say something like Quake Champions or something like that. If you have an end of life plan from the beginning, from the design phase, he's saying the extra cost would be free. Like if you plan for that ahead of time, he's saying the cost to have a functioning version of that. He said it wouldn't cost anything in terms of extra work. He said an MMO would, like a World of Warcraft kind of thing.
I think there's a couple ways to go about it. Legally, I mean, you could really put together a case about kind of going off of the themes you started with, that this is a sale of a good, that it's disingenuous. I actually do think that not only, I know you're saying that they're defrauding the government, not the consumer. I think in many ways they're defrauding the consumer. You could attack end user license agreements, especially with software. They've been attacked before, and companies have been forced to change practices.
The High Court of Paris has ruled on a lawsuit against Valve brought against them by a French consumer group for anti-consumer rights activities. It took them 4 years, but they totally ruled against Valve. Valve said they weren't guilty because Steam is a subscription service and thus not liable. The court said no, Steam sells games in perpetuity and not as part of a subscription package. That means they are goods and subject to European Union laws regarding goods. There is a major silver lining here that could actually lead to a lot less games being destroyed. Oh, and hey, this won't be the last time you hear me say this, but I'm sorry, I have to point this out. This court ruling totally vindicates what I was saying in the games as a service is fraud video. I put so much time into researching that freaking nobody was talking about this except that Deliciou guy. American copyright lawyers started coming out of the woodwork trying to tear it down, and hey, I'm operating completely powerless here. I felt naked in the breeze making that. But what did I say? The difference between a good and a service freaking matters. That can have real consequences under the law, and this is a giant gray zone. Now, what the French court ruling was aiming for is different than what I was, but their legal reasoning is almost identical to what I was saying.
Just started coordinating things to contact some game preservation groups, some French ones. There might be an additional angle to take also for trying to get game preservation laws enforced, or maybe created in France too. So I am progressing on that. I've decided France is like, it's the battlegrounds for where this should take place.
We should probably get into dying games, and I
Sure,
don't know
whatever
if
you want to talk about.
if you want to just give some kind of background on it for people who are unaware, like what's the problem and what is it that you're trying to do about it?
What we're seeing increase more, I mean, it happened before this, but we're seeing it just explode. I'd say starting from kind of the mid 2000s onward is, I guess, what I'm calling games as a service, where the only way to play this game officially is to connect to a server where the company that may develop the game or published it is in control of that. Because you had online multiplayer before this. I mean, stuff like Quake or, Star Siege Tribes. Or Half-Life series, you might connect to their online central server, but then you could also connect to a friend server or somebody else who just wants to run their server. So that even if the company server went down because they're done supporting this game, you can keep playing the game. There's no problem.
You mentioned one thing about, like, maybe it's not quite as much of an issue as book burning because perhaps games don't have the same deep content and that kind of thing. But I think, honestly, the way that games are viewed by people who aren't players of games is part of the problem, I think, some of the time, because I think they're not often seen as an art form that can actually have some, deeper meaning to it. It's just a game. Maybe even the word game doesn't help. But people would probably see books as having more value than games a lot of the time.
Well, it shouldn't even have to be an either-or situation, though. I mean,
Sure.
Well, that's another reason I push the consumer angle, because they can understand, even if they have no interest in games, it's like, oh, okay, so they destroyed what you bought and you're given no guarantee. It's like, yeah, that doesn't sound too legal. Yeah, it's they're being effectively destroyed after the point of sale.
Now, a lot of people asked about how my efforts to try and contact EA went, to let them know just how much gamers hate having their games destroyed in front of them. Well, that was a learning experience for me. I'm sorry to say I was a bit naive on that and learned that there's actually a system in place to ensure that any messages written to executives or management at EA never reach them. Instead, they'll go to the appropriate secretary, who will then throw them away or maybe offer you a coupon for writing them, something like that. They don't get passed on. So, sorry about that. I don't always know what I'm doing, but I keep doing things. On that note, I have some new plans. While I plan to keep attacking the problem of games being destroyed without the possibility of preservation on a legal front, I'm not optimistic about that. Not because I'm wrong this time too. In fact, I think there's a lot of evidence to show what I say in the Games as a Service video is correct legally, but more because the whole world is changing. So I think we're witnessing some shifts in just how laws in general work. Forget about gaming. We're at war. I mentioned in my Games as a Service video, the war on ownership. Companies are destroying games. They're destroying games they sold you perpetual licenses of, and they're not stopping. Every online-only game with no end-of-life plan is probably going to die, and you'll never be able to play it again. This one. What do you think is the greatest counterattack against the corporate push towards digital feudalism? And I think France is one of the last. I think France has the best chance with consumer laws of being able to push back against this. So if there could be even a victory in even one country like that could maybe spread to others. Connecting! Yeah, look at that! It's awards time already! Requires a central server. I'm not always doing the awards these days, but I will always dust off this one when applicable. Crack this? Yeah, this isn't gonna happen most likely because you can't crack this game. You'd have to construct a server emulator. Though I would settle for being able to preserve the map. The amount of effort that went into this is utterly staggering. There's nothing too special about the gameplay. If we could port the map to something that won't die, that would ease a lot of the pain for me. My brain still can't adapt to the idea of putting in so much effort into a game like this, only to destroy it all a few years later. I know 2070 is having its online features shut down also, but a Ubisoft sub-company is trying to fight to maintain them, or else fight itself, I'm not sure. Now this is a fantastic headline, but here is also a perfect example of what I mean regarding the mentality being taken here. Look at this sentence. Anno 2070 has been out for more than a decade now, and some might say that's enough time for fans to get their fill. Seriously? This is what PC Gamer, the self-proclaimed global authority on PC games, is writing on a partial game shutdown? This framing is trash. I've seen this argument before. It's juvenile, not really worth addressing, but since the global authority deems it fit to print, let's go through it super quick. You can timestamp this if you ever see this argument in the future. People had their chance to play the game. Okay, let's look at the obvious. What if they want to keep playing? I've seen frightening videos of what people are still doing with Mario 64. Also, this argument assumes everyone got a chance to play the game. Maybe they hadn't gotten around to it yet. Have you ever heard of a game backlog? What if they just discovered the game last week and now it's shutting down? What about every single person in the future who wants to play the game? Hey, you know Dracula was published in 1897? What if we had burned every single copy of the book in 1907 because, everybody had their chance to read it? That's literally the logic of this argument. I have almost no connections to establishment games journalism. I don't know how they think, but I will say, in my opinion, games media tends to give extremely softball coverage on game shutdowns. I literally can't remember seeing an article that talks about how this is preventable, questions the legality of the action, or, God forbid,
does research as a journalist on organizations that could help prevent this and redirect their readers to that. At most, I usually just see a sad acceptance, like no other outcome is possible. This makes me think this is either intentional, because the publication can't rock the boat too much or risk losing relations with game companies, or there's such rampant groupthink that the thought has literally never occurred to them. I don't know. When I made my games as a service video, one developer reached out to me and said he had literally never heard that argument before, that destroying a game people paid for is an unacceptable practice. That's depressing. Anyway, I saw a lot of comments on this news, and they mostly seem to fall into two categories. The first was just berating Stadia, saying it's crappy, glad it's dying, and so on. A lot of them didn't give a reason why, but the ones that did seemed to focus on the poor quality of service. The other category were people who were sad about this and felt that Google just wasn't handling this properly. But I don't think I saw any comments on how Stadia is the devil and is an existential threat to gaming, so I guess that's why I'm here. It's very simple. Game streaming services are just another option for playing a game. Not one I'm really interested in personally because of the latency, you can't customize the game much or mod it, and I don't like never-ending fees. But hey, if people want it, sure, there's no problem. But see, game streaming services and exclusive games are the harbinger of doom. Now, guess which one Stadia was? See, before anyone starts defending Stadia or a streaming service, think, which one are you really defending? Once the exclusive games get involved, then it's just the end. There's no hope for redemption. Because now they've taken hostages. The same happened to movies and photos and My Docs and other files. And it's great! Games are no different. Eventually, all of our games will be safely in the cloud too. And we'll feel great about it. Aww! Isn't that nice? The games are so safe and snugly in the cloud. Games requiring an online server with no end-of-life plan are still bigger than ever. Plus, I'm wary of Microsoft trying to court people by eating profits on their Game Pass, only to spring a trap later once they control enough market share. Just remember the original Xbox One plan for what their vision of gaming is. On December 14th, Ubisoft announced that they're exactly the bastards I was always afraid they were, and will be shutting down The Crew on March 31st of this year. So that means starting April, the game will be completely unplayable for everyone who bought it. But yeah, a unique and remarkable game that millions of people paid for is being destroyed. I'm pretty upset about this, but honestly, I feel almost the same as I did years ago, knowing this is going to happen. I told you, when it comes to games, I'm like that Cyclops from Krull and can see the deaths coming. I hate it. In fact, I hate it so much, I'm getting sick of reporting on this sort of thing and would rather do something. And it hit me, this is actually close to a perfect scenario for taking legal action. Again, the game had 21 million players at one point. Now that number may be misleading since Ubisoft gave the game away for free as a promotion in 2016, but there's a statement from 4 months earlier that it sold at least 5 million copies, so this is not some small fry game. That's a lot of potential plaintiffs. This is a high-profile game that was sold in stores under a perpetual license, and the buyers are going to be left with nothing. This is about as perfect an opportunity as we're going to get to challenge the system on this. Most games contain the code that interfaces with the hardware and run the game, and that's the whole story. Now for online multiplayer games, it's a little different, where a lot of the older ones will let players host the server that runs the game, then other people would connect to it, or sometimes give you the software to make that server a standalone thing and connect to that. But over time, more and more companies decided, hey, instead of letting the player host the game, what if we did it instead? Well, there are pros and cons to that, but that can be a valid approach. In theory. But here's the problem. The games industry has a horrible track record of maintaining its own games. So what happens when the publisher takes over the responsibility of running the game? Well, it's usually pretty good while they support the game. Then when they stop, it's a complete nightmare and has been responsible for destroying more video games than any other practice. That's a big shift, because the industry is trying to get users to go from a model where they get to keep their game, regardless of when support ends, to one where the game dies forever. I'm not a fan. For companies that do this, the number of games that survive in any form, forget being available commercially, is a lot worse than 13%. I did an informal investigation on it a few years ago and found it was closer to 3%. From my perspective, this has felt like a slow-moving coup to take away ownership from more and more people over time. So video game publishers are making billions selling you a game as a good, not telling you how long it will last, purposefully killing it later so you're left with nothing, but then they get to keep your money. Customers are used to video games lasting forever, more or less. You could have bought games from the 70s that still work today. You could have bought games from the 90s with online multiplayer that connect to the internet that still work today, even if the companies that made them no longer exist. But a lot of publishers like to place modern video games that are designed to die, but they won't tell you when, right alongside ones that last forever. Now, I personally hate this practice because art has innate value to me. So seeing games destroyed to me is the same as if someone were to walk into an art museum and start torching the paintings. Now, The Crew, I think, is a flawed but remarkable game, but none of that matters here. What matters is it had at least 12 million players, so this affects a lot of people. And Ubisoft is headquartered in France, and France has some of the strongest consumer laws in the world. See, this isn't really about The Crew or even Ubisoft. It's about trying to find a weak link in the industry so governments can examine this practice to stop publishers from destroying our games. This practice is very hazy legally. Many governments don't even have laws regarding this. If we can find even one major country to penalize this practice, that might fix everything. Because the thing about letting you keep your game is it's not that expensive for companies to do it, especially if it's a known requirement from the beginning. I've seen it as a priority to make this as easy as possible for everyone. To that end, I've been working with volunteers to launch a website to do just that. StopKillingGames.com. I hope you can remember that name. It's a multilingual website that can easily steer you exactly where you need to go to have maximum impact. We have blazed a trail for you to hit back against the industry. All you have to do is follow it. We've done all the hard parts for you. See, people can complain about the games industry, but the reality is all internet comments are meaningless. None of your comments matter, unless a government official is reading them. That's what this is. The Australian petition to stop killing games is up. The Canadian petition has just opened. Part of this campaign is we're petitioning the UK government to stop the destruction of video games when support ends. And not only has it opened, but we've since cleared our first hurdle and have gotten a direct response from government. And its response, it looks like a useless non-answer at first glance, and it mostly is, but oh man, there is some meat hidden away in there too. Here, these are the only lines that really matter in all of this. The CPRs require information to consumers to be clear and correct, and prohibit commercial practices which, through false information or misleading omissions, cause the average consumer to make a different choice. The regulations prohibit commercial practices which omit or hide information which the average consumer needs to make an informed choice. Information the consumer needs to make an informed choice. You mean like when a game is going to shut down? And there are no standards at all in the industry. The Culling 2 lasted 8 days. Guild Wars has been operating for 19 years and is still going. That's kind of a big spread. I'd say customers need to know how long that service period is in order to make a good decision. Now, in fairness, the Culling 2 refunded everybody. But what about Lawbreakers? That lasted 1 year. I don't think they refunded anyone. And better yet, for games like The Crew, they made deals with record labels and car manufacturers to use their brands. And according to Ubisoft itself, those licenses expired. Ubisoft knew when those licenses expired, back in 2014 at the latest. But they didn't inform the customer about that until 9 years later. Anyway, the point is, this is our clear violation from the industry. Forget the crew. I want to say 99.9% of all games that require an internet connection never tell you how long they'll last when you buy them. They usually only tell you that about 3 months before they shut down. If a customer doesn't know if their game is going to last 1 year or 19 and counting, how can they be informed? That's just gambling then. So as I read this, it is totally legal for publishers to destroy your games in the UK. That sucks. But according to the government itself, and more specifically, Section 6.1 of the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations 2008, it is not legal for companies to not tell you when they're going to shut down your game when you buy it. And if you play video games, you know that's the case with almost every single company that sells online games. This is how we can do something in the UK. Now granted, this is not as good as penalizing companies for destroying your games directly, but it may take us to the same place because companies do not want to tell you when your games will expire. Because if the average customer knows their game is going to die and exactly when, that will undoubtedly hurt sales. My theory is companies will do anything to not have to put a label like this on their games. It would depress sales and create a permanent reminder of what the customer is losing. Now, most of my efforts have gone towards challenging the legality of this practice in various countries. Because it's so consumer hostile, it's not clear if what's going on is even legal. That's still ongoing, but now we have a new option, proposing new law, and for the entire European Union. It took months to get put together and processed, but now we have a European Citizens Initiative devoted to halting the destruction of video games. You can read it yourself. This would require publishers to leave games they have sold to customers in a working state at the time of shutdown, without requiring any further connection to them or affiliated parties for the games to function. How they would do this would be up to them. This would also apply to free-to-play games that contain microtransactions. Because if you purchased a microtransaction as a good, then the game is made unplayable, well then you just lost your goods. This would not require publishers to give up any of their intellectual property rights, give up their source code, though that one would still be nice. It wouldn't require endless support. They can end it anytime they want as far as we're concerned. They wouldn't need to host servers. Though they would have to either patch out that requirement or else allow customers to host them privately. Assume any liability for what customers do with their copies of games. And finally, nothing about this initiative would have any impact on publisher business practices while the game is being supported. In other words, publishers can continue doing whatever they want, as long as you get to keep your game. It amazes me when some people say that's going too far in favor of the consumer. Though to be fair, that's probably not most Europeans. The idea here is we're just trying to stop games from being destroyed. That's it. So we're taking as narrow an approach as possible that still solves the problem. And it's insult to injury that many games will just give you the server side as part of your purchase. So even on a conceptual level, we are really stretching definitions to call this part of the game a service. And let me tell you a secret. Any game can be made into a service game. Like take Super Mario Brothers. You can remove the Goombas and the power block locations, hold that data server side, and then lock you out in the menu until you authenticate. Now, Super Mario Bros. Is a live service game that will brick if the company shuts it down. Hooray! All this crap that prevents you from playing the game is artificial. Now, of course, it makes sense to keep running it as a service because you can make a lot of money that way. Plus, all those real service aspects I mentioned improve the quality of the game. And we're not trying to stop any of that. Companies can keep making money as long as they want to. We're specifically talking about cases where all the services have shut down and the company is no longer making money. Now, of course, there could be many legal reasons the company doesn't just release their server software to customers once they're done making money. But guess what? That's why we're trying to get the law changed. So these barriers don't need to exist. And it's preventable. Every time MMO emulators get leaked or reverse engineered or released by the devs themselves, it just shows this is all possible. customers hate having their games destroyed. This is not a hard concept to understand. In Australia, we did get a response back on the petition. It's pretty similar to the EU one, although this response illustrates so clearly what we've been dealing with on every level. For digital products such as video games, consumers often purchase a license to use the product and do not have direct ownership over that product. That means that consumer rights in relation to digital products are primarily governed by the terms and conditions set by the business and the associated license agreement. Okay, so that's kind of bad because it says you look and do whatever you want. But then it says terms and conditions in licensing agreements are subject to statutory protections in the Australian consumer law. So that's good because that means that overrides the end user license agreement. Terms are unfair if they cause a significant imbalance in the rights and obligations of the parties under the contract. Yeah, they're circumventing all goods and services laws. The EULA says no, but then the EULA is unfair. So it's like, what this really says is it is a damn good thing we had the cruise shut down to act on, because we have sent all the complaints to the ACCC, and I've paid for the law firm to escalate that, and it looks like I needed that. I sent this page to the law firm so they could kind of check on it, and they sent a damn good complaint to the ACCC. They had like over 40 points that they basically cover every single argument you can make against this practice from a legal perspective. And I got a reply from them just a couple days ago. It has escalated at the Consumer Protection Agency. So that's kind of the best we can hope for. Generally speaking, why do so many people seem to actively defend corporate interests to the detriment of the consumer, that is, themselves? Well, in this case, I think I suspect it's a vocal minority, where the people who are against this might be really against this and very outspoken about it. Our most outspoken critic of the campaign has been YouTube channel or streamer, goes by Pirate Software. And his original video on this, he gave like a reaction video, and he unloaded like a lot of insults. Not requiring any further connection to them or affiliated parties for the games to function.
You literally cannot do that.
How they would do this would be up to them.
We're going to pose a problem to you and then shit on your desk and then make you clean it up and figure it out. Why don't you just do that, developer?
This is why this initiative came up in the first place. The reason this became an initiative is because so many companies were shitting on their consumer's desk by saying, I know that you bought a game, not a service, but we're going to take it away from you. When you've had millions of people that have had their desk shit on, I don't think that they're shitting on the developer's desk. I think from the perspective of that gamer that bought that game that no longer works, what they're doing is they're taking the shit off of their desk and they're shoveling it onto the developer and publisher where it belongs.
Implement an end-of-life plan to modify or patch the game so that it can run on customer systems with no further support. If it's a live service game, most of them can't do that.
This would require publishers to leave games they have sold to customers in a working state at the time of shutdown.
How are you going to do that with World of Warcraft? How are you going to do that with any live service game?
Now, you probably never played this MMORPG, and I wouldn't fault you for it. But this is an example of when a game gets shut down. What people had done was they had reverse engineered the actual server files, and you can download them, run them, and basically play the Matrix Online MMO right now, if you wanted to, locally on a system, or maybe even invite some of your friends.
How are you going to do that with Final Fantasy XIV?
Project Meteor, for instance, if you wanted to play the original version of Final Fantasy XIV, which doesn't exist anymore, but if you want to play that original version, there is a project emulator that exists. And there's footage of this individual, Dark Fusion, who actually put together a quick Final Fantasy 1.0 build and actually loaded it up and started playing the games.
What happens when it's an indie developer? Imagine Realm of the Mad God. and Realm of the Mad God suddenly goes out of business and the indie studio isn't able to do this, what are they going to do? Face fines?
Secondly, this initiative is not going to require games to be updated retroactively. When a right to repair bill passes, they don't have to go back through all their hardware from 1990 through 2023 and make parts and schematics and diagrams available, because that would be fairly unreasonable. What it usually means is not only does it not apply retroactively, it also applies in the future. So a bill that's passed in 2022 may say in it, this does not apply to anything created before May of 2024. I could completely understand a video game developer saying, do I really have to go back and patch code from 2004 for this? The amount of resources that may take a smaller studio or a smaller developer, that really is the type of thing that would be burdensome on them. It would be burdensome on a large company, but they pay for it, whereas a small company, I can imagine them going bankrupt over it. That's not going to apply in that case.
So he can't change what that is. So what he did was change, in his words, what Stop Killing Games is about. So no, what's in the initiative is our goal.
If you're only talking about the very tiny sliver of single-player games that require an online connection to always be active, then it needs to be stated as such without such generic language. Nowhere in there does it say that it's directly targeting always online single-player games. On March 31st, 2024, Ubisoft shut down the game's servers, rendering the game unplayable, which is normal for live service games. The only thing that I can see in here that could be a problem is if they post it as not an online-only experience. But everything that I found online shows that the game was always marketed as online only. If you're going to be buying an online-only game, that means it can only run when it's online. And there are some people that'll say, well, just make it all single player. Well, I've explained that that doesn't make any sense in the first place. If you're making it all single player, you'd have to carve off all of that, and it's developer time and money.
Someone was looking at the executable in a hex editor and found references to an offline mode, and a screenshot of a production version of the game was posted. Apparently, it's just a flag they need to turn on, except it's encrypted. It is unclear if these actions from the company are legally permitted. There is no clear legal regulation for this.
Qnamo with 500 bits said, "Hey Thor, Ross Scott from Accursed Farms is starting a global effort to try and push back against companies killing games with online components rather than patching them to work offline in some capacity. US law is kinda screwed, but if it interests you, check out what he is doing sometime."
I am interested. I'll look into him. That's a really good shout. Yeah, that's a good thing. It's a good thing, to be honest with you. Huh. Interesting. Yeah, interesting. I'm going to look into that. I dropped the mask entirely. I have no qualms about that. If the intention is to turn all live service games into single-player games, they can eat my entire ass. The whole thing. It is a vaguely worded, badly managed request to a government that has no idea what it's doing in this arena.
And I offered to discuss this and clarify things.
If you're interested, I'd be fine with having a discussion with you on where we could at least clarify things, but your choice. I don't think I want to do that. And the reason why is this, where you discuss reasons why your initiative could pass. And your description of this, I find to be disgusting.
Politicians like easy wins, and this doesn't require them to do much at all. He said no, he was not interested, and I heard in another stream he was also not interested.
As a whole. Like, it's gross, dude. It's greasy as shit. And because of that, I don't want to talk to him. I'd be willing to talk to, like, Louis Rossman or anybody else about this because they'll actually have a conversation. But that shit shows me, like, the greasy used car salesman thing, where they're not actually trying to sell you a good product. They're just trying to sell you a product. And I hate people like that.
You think I insulted his mother from how he responded. But the most noteworthy part of it is that he kept saying repeatedly, this is not a problem. This is not a problem.
I think live service games getting sunsetted is fine. I've always thought that. Live service games are a point in time. You have experiences while they are active. You have experiences with the community that is there. The same thing can be said of your Discord of friends. The same thing can be said of your friends that you knew in high school. That's it. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Of course we keep your money because you bought the experience, you experienced it, and then the game was over, and eventually the community dies, and we turn the servers off. Not only do I not want to back this, I'm going to actively tell people not to.
Yeah, what is it? Peasant mentality? Is that what that's called?
To kill the entire live service industry by doing that. Under the guise of player ownership. We sunset games because they are either no longer profitable or there's no longer a community there whatsoever. That is why they get shut down. That is how that works. And if you think that you have ownership over that just because you were a consumer that bought the video game, you are dead wrong.
Yeah, I guess if you like having things you own taken from you, don't sign this initiative. You won't like it. Unfortunately, that one is way bigger than any I've made on it. And it's kind of misrepresenting the campaign in a lot of ways. Well, I think it's more of like a not wanting to do it issue rather than not being able to come up with a way to do it. The UK stuff is currently stalled. We're waiting on two different things. One for the petitions to reopen and two for the Competition and Markets Authority to get more authority. Are you at all worried that the announcement from Ubisoft that the Crew 2 and Motorfest will be receiving an end-of-life mode will cause people to stop caring about the campaign? Or at the very least, that it'll cool down people's motivation to sign the European Citizens Initiative? No, I don't think so at all. However, I think organically that's slowing down. So in other words, I think it's kind of slowing down based on just how much reach I have. No, if anything, I think it helps the movement because it kind of gives us more legitimacy. Yeah, so for those that don't know, Ubisoft announced that they're going to add offline modes to the Crew 2 and the Crew Motorfest, which that honestly doesn't change our plans or anything we're doing at all. So I kind of look at this as just a big bonus or a consolation prize. So yeah, don't get me wrong, I'm very happy they're doing it. It's just that doesn't change the trajectory of anything. I guess the most recent news is we have a response from Canada on the petition. Unfortunately, they are passing the buck. What the response says is that, you know, this sounds important, let the provinces deal with it. In Australia, the petition finished, and they kind of talked out of both sides of their mouth, but if you read between the lines, what it kind of says is, go through the agencies on this, like the ACCC, which is what we were already doing. So that's the reason I didn't give it a lot of attention, is because the answer is keep doing what you're doing, essentially. So we just have to keep waiting on that. I was invited to the BEUC, the European Consumer Organization, and they're looking much more long-term, and they were like kind of grouping in other issues like with, you know, predatory monetization or targeting kids. So my issue was just kind of mixed in with those. But the one takeaway from that is they might be able to escalate more action on this. I forget the venue through which it went. That's my fault. But if we can have more statistics on what's happening, I'm pretty sure we could come up with stats. The UK government has responded to the new petition. You know, the one about trying to stop publishers from destroying video games they've already sold to you. And despite having clear wording, a new parliament, and a new dominant political party, the answer is awfully familiar. So familiar, in fact, I think it might even be the same people answering it. When I was reading this, I had deja vu. That's because they copied and pasted half the answer. Actually, more than half. In some cases, it's literally the exact same words. Yeah, you remember. The old answer that was so bad the petitions committee rejected it and asked them to do it again because they weren't addressing the actual complaint? Except then Parliament dissolved, so they never got around to it? Yeah, that answer. Well, it looks like the UK government is up to their old tricks. Here, I went and highlighted all the parts that are either literally saying the exact same thing as before, or else are lightly paraphrased. Wow, that's almost the whole damn document. So that's the reply. A copied and pasted answer that doesn't fit the complaint. Now, they did say no, I have to give them credit for that, but then all the reasons why are either unrelated or are sending us to agencies that can't fix the problem. I would say they're misunderstanding what we're asking for, except it's the second time they're doing this. I mean, you've probably seen the old Upton Sinclair quote. I think it's just as relevant today. You know, I've gotten some heat before about my political cynicism, but I hope you can at least see where some of that's coming from. Hey, bonus points. This old answer was under the department being led by Conservative Party members. This new one is the department being led by Labour Party members. Wow, What an amazing opposition party. Look at all that opposition. I mean, they're running it. Look, there they are. This is their turf. And at the time of this video, the rate we're gathering signatures is not enough, and we won't make it without a big promotion. That said, we have a big promotion coming up that I can't talk about yet, and personally, I think it's going to make or break the initiative.
One thing I do want to ask you is, you know, you said you've been interested in this for like 10 plus years, but, you know, there's a lot of people that are obviously been interested in this topic. Why did you decide to start this? Like why are you the person who is doing this? Why did you bother doing it?
It's a wonderful question. I never wanted to be, and I have multiple videos prior to starting this saying, you know, I'm best as just a mascot for this, you know, or like better to get people who really know what they're doing, or, you know, have a larger presence. I guess just nobody stepped up. I mean, it's, or nobody who is in a position, like I have like a medium-sized audience, so I'm able to reach some people on this. I mean, there are people who care about it as much as I do. I know that, but they might not have been in a position to influence much. This is a constant uphill battle because you have the perception of gamers that, from a lot of them, that they don't realize you can have, this is all a conscious decision by companies, and they don't have to have this. I mean, see, in my mind, just the fact that you have World of Warcraft emulators, or, you know, I think you mentioned Final Fantasy 14.
RuneScape's a lot further along. RuneScape had private servers before WoW had private servers. Like, they work perfectly.
Those are big, complicated MMO games, and people are running them on home systems. So this is certainly possible, what we're asking for. And, like, I understand people getting tripped up over the license arguments, where I have to explain this is more in the future, where it's kind of like, you know, you're breaking the cycle, where all these licenses that they can't, that just don't allow it now, well, that can be renegotiated in the future if it's a known requirement. I get people getting tripped up on that, but so some people, especially young gamers, don't understand this is even possible first. I think I'm just crazy. Remember a few months back, I was talking about, like, we had a big promotion coming that ended up not following through. Well, now it looks like I can give details about that. What was going on there was we were in talks with GOG for a long time. Well, GOG became more and more interested in it. In October, they told us that they were going to mention this in their newsletter, like the European Citizens Initiative. And my understanding is that reaches millions of people. So that, even though most of them, a whole lot of them might not have been in the EU, that probably would have boosted our numbers, you know, within closing distance of the threshold. We got a confirmation it's going to be in the newsletter. Well, December passed and the contacts that they were with got laid off. And then a new person came in, and then they said, like, well, maybe we could have you in the newsletter, but we want to see, like, how much publicity we can get on our end from GOG. Then finally in March, like I think like late March, we got a response saying, well, no, we can't put you on the newsletter because that's for commercial interest only. So we kind of got strung along for half a year on this. I don't know why. I mean, maybe it was a miscommunication, like internally, or maybe they committed to it, but then the people who did that didn't work there anymore, and the company decided to change direction. So that all got thrown out the window. I want to let people know, because I never would have announced that we have a big promotion coming if I hadn't got a confirmation about that. Around that time, yeah, like a month or two back, I said there might be another promotion coming. Now I can talk about that. The new promotion, I never would have predicted this one, was I got contacted by an ad agency that was representing Heineken, of all companies, you know, the beer maker. They're doing this big publicity push on gamer bars, where they recognize that there's like a lot of like online communities involved with certain games. And when games get shut down, that creates a problem, because then if there's a community around that where, let's say they meet at a bar to play it or discuss it, then that kind of kills the community. And they were like, had interest in hosting games that have been shut down, that sort of thing. And they felt like the European Citizens Initiative fit in almost perfectly with what they were doing, and were willing to promote it for us for free. They were putting together videos, this promotional material. It was all ready to go. And then that got postponed. The problem is that got postponed until next year after the Citizens Initiative ends. They're still all for this. Like, I checked the ad agency representative. They support the initiative because they don't like seeing games destroyed either. In their cases, because of their marketing interests. So, but I only found that out just a couple days ago that it got canceled. This thing that they were talking about, like a gamer lounge marketing promotion, it sounded huge. It was going to be a global thing. They said they were going to get in all these gaming magazines talking about it, and the Citizens Initiative was going to ride along with that, all of it. So, man, that could have changed the entire landscape of this. I've been in talks with the BEUC, the European Consumer Organization, about, they're showing some interest in the initiative also, and just the concept, well, actually not just the initiative, but just the concept of game ownership. They're trying to tie in a few issues like predatory monetization, you know, like targeting of children for like stuff that's kind of like on the border of gambling. And they have interest in, you know, tying our issue in with others, which I'm totally fine with piggybacking onto other initiatives for, you know, being not to stop games from being destroyed. And we had talks in December. They wanted to meet up again in March. We had a talk in March, and they might be able to be kind of a backdoor approach towards getting law proposed within the EU Commission this way. However, they're going to be iffier, and they're also probably going to be a lot longer. I mean, like years for things to implement. But I've said sure, and they said that the current people running the EU Commission. It's like if we lose, we lose. But to lose only because we did nothing, and that's the part that just drove me crazy on this, and has been the real fire behind all of this. Now, over the past year, we've done more on this than I would have thought possible, really. Here's a quick overview of everything we've been doing. Now, some approaches were dead ends, but others still show a lot of promise. As someone with no experience with political activism prior to this, I think this is damned impressive. Finally, I want to end this by saying even if the Citizens Initiative fails, it's not the only play we have. I cannot emphasize enough what a big deal it is that we got this escalated not at one, but 3 different agencies. It's entirely possible we've already won this and we just don't know it yet. I mean, it's a joke I even have to do any of this for us to try not to get robbed. But that's gaming for you.